right, guys. So what's up, everyone? My name's Kyle Gordon, and I'm here with DoinGud and Aaron and David McDonald. Today, we are going to be having a lovely conversation about Fluff World, ASM, and all the incredible projects these fine gentlemen are working on. They're doing some of the coolest stuff in the metaverse and NFT space, in my opinion. And DoinGud is our company. And we are basically an NFT ecosystem empowering creators, curators, and communities to do good. So it's a pleasure to be talking to these two gentlemen today. And so I'd love for you to give like a quick introduction. Aaron and David, maybe give a quick intro on yourselves, and then we can dive in.
Yeah, cool. Two McDonald's for the price of one today. So Aaron McDonald, I'm a co-founder and entrepreneur and investor, I guess. My day job, I am a general partner for NetX Fund and D64 funds, investing in Web3 communities and companies. I'm also a part-time founder. I have an annoying habit of working with awesome people and coming up with awesome ideas. And so co-founded the Altered State Machine, and Non-Fungible Labs has produced the Fluff World collection amongst some other things recently. So I'm really excited to be on the show today and chatting through all things metaverse.
Cool. David McDonald here, much like Aaron, but prettier and a little bit younger. So that's pretty cool. I've got a background in tech, particularly geospatial, and have been working in the blockchain space alongside Aaron for the past sort of 5 or so years, running ventures across New Zealand, Australia, and Japan.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And so I guess first off, let's dive into Fluff World. How did it get started? How did you guys get involved in this? I know David, you're involved in like ASM as well, and all of the amazing projects you're working on. So maybe like, let's start off with Fluff World and discuss how it ties into the other projects you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fluff World came out of a venture I co-founded earlier this year called Non-Fungible Labs. And we started Non-Fungible Labs with a goal of trying to take what was an emerging theme around, the metaverse and think about how content would need to be created and communities need to be built and lore and stories needed to be built in order to achieve the thing that people had in their heads about what the metaverse was supposed to be. Because what was happening at the time was cool. There was a lot of kind of art starting to come out, and it was kind of very an art-centric movement. And where we felt things were going was kind of much more an immersive and interactive and dynamic environment. So we kind of had a couple of cracks at figuring things out with the Non-Fungible Labs team. The first thing we actually launched was a mixed let's call it Omniverse treasure hunt, where we were working with street artists around the world to bury NFTs in a treasure hunt in street art, and trying to connect this kind of physical hunt in the real world for street art with the collection of NFTs in the metaverse that represented that art. And onboard kind of new artists into the space and create this kind of idea of a journey or a story that people could be, a game that people could be involved with, whether you were a crypto person or you were totally new to NFTs and the space. And in fact, the people who started doing these hunts with us were kind of completely new to the space. They just got into the idea of finding this art, and it was really cool. And we were helping them, create their first wallets and stuff like that. And that kind of, I guess, set the tone for how we were going to approach building out collections in the space, to make this an accessible thing for new people to try and create engaging content that wasn't single dimensional, that was fun to play with, and be a part of and help build as a community together. So so the fluff characters came out of that kind of thinking. And Jesse, who's the creative director at Non-Fungible Labs, has rabbits. And so he had this like idea one day, and we were like working on some other stuff, like completely different stuff. And then he comes and he's like, so I've been working on this and I've made, this character. What do we think? And we were like all blown away, like, this is fucking dope. Like, there's nothing else looking like this in the space. Like, let's double down and get this done. So yeah, we kind of zoned in and focused and honed in on that, and really, I think created, this platform more than an avatar for content to be created and shared, and community to be involved in the building of lore and story, and go about world building in this kind of very organic, community centric way. And now it's become, this huge, juggernaut of a project, which is kind of absorbing all sorts of cool stuff around it. We've got, metaverse spaces, we've got different kinds of characters, we've got physical world experiences, we're integrating intelligence with the altered state machine. And that's kind of the culmination, I guess, of my last 5 years in crypto, which has all been kind of focused on how do you get like mass adoption for this technology? Because the meme of changing the world with decentralization only works if you can bring the average person along on that journey. And the super cool thing about where we're at now is that content is the killer app to achieve that adoption with. And now we get to create this awesome content that engages people and gets them into using the infrastructure we've all been building for the last 5 years, across the different protocol layers and the application layers, and now this content layer. So it's a really exciting time to be in the industry and doing some pretty cool stuff.
Awesome. And David, anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think he said everything, but I do like his point around how important community is to what we're doing, and the fact that it is exactly the central focus point for everything. Everything grows from there. I spend a lot of time interacting on the Discord with the community, because that's where the growth in Altered State Machine happens. That's where we get the ideas and the engagement, and watching how that grows out over time is really fascinating to me.
That actually,
yeah.
Go
ahead. I was going to say, like, double down and tell us a bit more about the Altered State Machine, because I didn't really cover that.
Yeah, please, David. Hear it.
Yeah. So Altered State Machine comes from a thing that I've been fascinated with basically my entire life, which is the concept of around gamification of AI. And it's something I've been working on sort of quietly in the background for the past few years, and really got into it before COVID hit, when I was living in Japan, and started building out prototypes. And then coming back to New Zealand, me and Aaron had always been sort of discussing it. Coming back to New Zealand, we kind of hit on some really key technology innovations in some of these prototypes that we were building out, and we decided this is the right time to get this thing out here. And we started Altered State Machine from there. Super passionate from a nerd point of view around machine learning, but seeing what the potential use cases that this can do is just amazing. I played MMOs growing up and sort of in my 20s and stuff, and you look at those worlds as kind of proto metaverses. And if you can imagine in those worlds being able to own the assets inside them, and have a much more immersive experience, and the NPCs are community content, and you sort of extrapolate from there, the possibilities kind of get endless in the metaverse space.
That's awesome. I mean, it seems like, especially like the machine learning stuff, I think like we're seeing so much cool projects happening right now with regards to like the generative art and like people using like AI to create really fascinating works. Maybe like a great segue into this is maybe to talk a little bit more about how you guys are applying machine learning and AI, not just to like, you know, I guess the ASM brains, but in addition to like the artwork and like the actual visual representation of the things that you're releasing.
Yeah, I mean, it is really fascinating, and I'm like, the human element of this kind of generative art is fascinating to me because it's this kind of weird thing where we're finding connectivity and beauty in the randomness of the universe almost, because the way that these things generate art is kind of it's not going through a thought process like we're going through a thought process as humans creating the art. There is this kind of deterministic element to it almost, and the fact that we kind of see beauty in this in the creation of this stuff is pretty cool as a kind of human psychology thing. So I think that's a really like fascinating part of this generative art movement. You wouldn't like naturally think, maybe looking back 20 years ago, that people would be so emotionally attached to something that's generated by a machine, you know. And so when we're kind of looking at the space, we're always trying to like take things to the next level. And I think the Thingies is a really good example of this, where we took the concept of creating generative art and then applied that to characters and avatars. And so Thingies are artists in their own right, but they're also a piece of art that's been generated by intelligence. So we have this system where an AI was trained by looking at cool pieces of art, and then it painted 10,000 pieces of art, and then that art got translated into a furry pattern, which resides on each one of these thingies. So they're like individual artworks in their own right. Each character is a generated piece of art. I think it's the first time that an AI has created a generative avatar collection like this, especially three-dimensional one. But you know, let's get crazy. So we use the altered state machine protocol to turn each one of those pieces of art into an artist. And so people will be able to put their thingy to work creating art, which then they can mint, and then people might buy that art. So you've got this kind of perpetual or unstoppable art machine loop, where the thingy is a piece of art, and then it's creating art, and the art it's creating is somewhat based on its own art as an input to that creative process. And so kind of you have this virtuous cycle, which I think is really cool. And then we're also using a percentage of the proceeds on that to fund indigenous real world artists. So it is this kind of unstoppable perpetual art machine that's kind of interacting between the machine world and the human world and bringing those two things together, which I think is a really exciting concept. And they look fucking cool.
They definitely do.
That's true. The brains is also an interesting take on that. So they are the genome matrix for the altered state machine brains themselves, and they all have different randomly generated attributes, and we pass those attributes through an AI, which then generates the color map that's actually going to be the representation of that brain. So it's the brains are using their own genome matrix to generate what it thinks it would be a pleasing color map for its own brain. And I really love these little loop things that you can do with the AIs, where it's kind of creating itself from itself.
Yeah. Artception.
Artception.
Super cool, guys. So I want to circle back a little bit and touch on something that David mentioned. And it was the community and how he spends a lot of time like talking and engaging with the community. And I think a lot of people can definitely say you guys put a lot of effort into your community, engaging with the community. And I remember on like the first days, like the Discord was spun up when the community first joined, especially from like the Fluff World perspective. Like the messages that we saw a lot and the feedback that a lot of people were giving was like, when chill, when hype, like, yo, like, let's grow this thing, let's blow this thing up. And you guys have always been so firm in your belief that you want to have an organic growing community, and like really have something that's like sustainable, which was very like controversial, I would say, at the time. But I think from what we've seen now is that it's really blossomed into something that's beautiful, and people are really excited to engage and interact. And like, it's not full of people just chasing like price and hype. So maybe let's talk about that intentionality and like how you guys came to build what you built with your community.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the credit for this comes back to Alex, who's one of the co-founders at Non-Fungible Labs. His vision for being an inviting and inclusive space for people to come in and engage with, and for our community to genuinely be part of the creation process. I think, again, it harks back to that deeper thinking we did early on about what the metaverse really is about. And the metaverse isn't a thing which corporations build and then rent you. That's kind of like the Web 2 mentality, is we create this stuff and you consume it. And the metaverse, by contrast, is we create this stuff ourselves, between us, this co-creation kind of idea. And so in order to make that true, you've got to have people who are committed to that process and that journey, because we can't create a world in an instant. It's going to take time. And if we're going to co-create this, we need people who are going to be on that journey for that period of time. So so being really deliberate in the early days about not, when influencer, was like a catch cry in the early discords, and we're like, sorry, that's just not us. If you want that, go somewhere else. Having really high standards for how people behave in the community and welcome people in, and nurturing a culture of being inviting and inclusive. If you go into our discords, the Fluff World discords versus an Altered State Machine now, versus many other NFT projects, it's a totally different vibe. People are super engaged in what's going on. They're super helpful about helping people explore the space and understand it. We've given tools throughout the process for our community to be actively involved in how things are emerging out of this space, and where they're interacting with building lore with us. They're creating content with us. They're helping us shape the nature of the characters as they evolve. There's so many things that come out of that, creating that setting of inclusivity and putting people on a journey to start off with, that in the end will end up being a much more powerful thing. I mean, people look at Bored Apes, right, and they think that the success of that collection comes down to things like art, for example, being super dope, and it is, or the moment in time when they got into the market, capturing the imagination. But I think one of the most powerful thing, or probably the most powerful thing, was the way that they went about rights. And you look at that on superficial level, and that's cool. And people kind of naturally think, well, that means, people can monetize it and then it's a more valuable asset. Actually, no. What it did was it allowed people to be free to be creative and build what the collection became. They could take that and they could go and do stuff with it and turn it into something that was bigger than itself, bigger than you could ever produce as an organization pushing content out. So community becomes super important if you're there for the long haul. If you're just there for a pump, well, then it doesn't really matter, but that's not what we're building. And, the journey we're on is to create something that is extremely valuable over a long time horizon. And the community is the most important ingredient in that. We can have great art, we can have great partnerships, we can have great technology, but unless our community is part of that journey and actively involved in creating that with us, then it's kind of almost pointless, but at the same time, it's never going to work either.
David? gonna back that up.
As usual, Aaron pretty much said everything that I wanted to say, but I want to reiterate the point around how important community is, and that engagement and that feedback loop that we get into what we're building. It's all very well for me to have, a pretty choice idea, but when I amplify the power of that idea with a community 10,000 strong, and get feedback and refine it from there, it becomes a fucking fantastic idea.
Yeah, and I think the altered state machine is like, the way that your community team kind of has built out this kind of community around discovery inside of altered state machines really neat too. Like it's, the journey we started with Fluff World was every moment in the process of a user engaging with us was a game. It wasn't just, come here, join our Discord, get a freebie, pump the token. It was like when you came into the Discord, the first thing that happened was a puzzle was given to you. You didn't know it at the time, but it was there in the background. And then slowly people discovered, oh, this actually means something, and there's something behind this. And if we do this thing, we can discover these little Easter eggs as we go. And so this kind of community building is not just about the feedback loop, but it's actually giving people a reason to dig deeper, to kind of want to explore, to feel like they've discovered something. And so when you're thinking about kind of community building, it's making the process a fun process, and that's a really important ingredient for world building in general.
Yeah, when I'm talking about the game design side of things, and as you know, we've got AFA and a few other game projects in the pipeline. When I'm talking about the game design side of things, I'm talking to people about how the whole thing's a game, the Discord server, the online marketplaces, Twitter, the whole thing is, and this is what the metaverse is about, it's the partnerships that we have. All of this comes into the game design, and the actual executable, the football game, the AFA football game is a small part of that wider game. And you've got to think about it in that kind of context where community is the core game loop, and these are side quests, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess when we start talking about these side quests or games and stuff, obviously these brains allow your characters to sort of function as this intelligent being in a space. And this kind of ties into a lot of the things you guys have been talking about like your metaverse project, like the play to earn, your spaces, the one that you're kind of living in right now, Aaron.
Yeah.
And so maybe let's talk about that like a little bit, because it's, while you have all these different projects, they're all kind of interconnected into each other, and they all kind of play off one another. It's almost crazy to think about, because the vision is so grand. So I would love to hear, how this kind of plays in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, in terms of ecosystem and infrastructure, like one of the things when I first founded Centrality was the kind of central organizing thought around that is around this snowball effect. And people ask me, oh, why are you building a blockchain company that's supposed to be decentralized and you call it Centrality? And actually, centrality is a term used in mathematics and in graph theory. And what it is it's a way to find the supernodes between interconnected entities in a system. And so the theory was, could you create this flywheel effect where if you're very deliberate about what you built and who you invested in, they could help each other to be successful? Because one of the big problems in the Web 2 world when we started this thing was if you weren't one of the big tech companies, your chance of being successful was low. And it was early on in the kind of Valley model, it was relatively easy to do something cool and become a target for acquisition by a bigger company, and you kind of have these roll-ups happening, and this innovation was proliferating, and there was kind of a good platform for diversity of innovation. And over time, that started to get compressed because if the big guys saw you doing something, they could just copy it. You know, it would be a feature in our app as opposed to a whole business in its own right. And what that does is like narrows the opportunity of success happening, and therefore constrains innovation. And then Web3 comes along, and we get this second chance, this, you know, to bite at the apple, to create small scale innovation again that had a chance to be successful. And there weren't these incumbents there that could squash you. And so that was the opportunity. But the problem space was, well, that's fucking hard. Like, how do you overcome this juggernaut of technology giants that exists out there? And the way to do that, to get this scale and solve these chicken and egg problems, you know, I have a product, I don't have customers. I want to refine my product, I don't have data. I need data, I need users to get that data. I don't have users because my product isn't refined. Like, all of these chicken and egg loops that we saw coming up as building a startup, we were like, well, how can you solve that? And the outcome of that research and kind of thinking was, well, you solve that by creating this idea of connected ventures, which is you deliberately invest in and build companies that provide a solution to other companies in your portfolio, whether that's solving a market entry problem, whether that's solving a data problem, whether that's solving a technology problem. And if you're deliberate enough about it, then you should get this flywheel effect where the pieces click together eventually, and they solve each other's problems, they validate each other's use cases, and they become each other's first customers, and you kind of get this kind of momentum going that reduces the chance of failure and builds like I always say, like, I like to build a herd of strong zebras as opposed to a unicorn. Unicorns don't exist. And so you can kind of get this effect, this flywheel effect going. And so that's really what's happened now, is like we've got all these infrastructure, like underlying things that have been built either directly through us, or I've invested in, or partnered with guys like Tyler to, you know, who's building an ecosystem of protocols that interlock with each other, very similar thinking. And now these things are starting to play off against each other and come together to form the metaverse, you know, whether that's the content that we're creating through Fluff World, whether it's protocols like Universe XYZ to open up marketplaces, whether it's protocols like Silo to connect communications across the metaverse, whether it's Altered State Machine as a new Lego brick for introducing intelligence to the metaverse spaces, whether it's the likes of InterDAO, which are providing a DeFi Lego brick to the metaverse. So all of these things that are kind of in this circle that seem random have been quite deliberate moves, and kind of jigsaw puzzles coming together now, and really expressing through the user experience of this content. So yeah, it's been a really fun journey, and now I think, you know, the whole space, and you're not just outside of the work we've been doing. You know, people ask me, why will this be successful? And the reason it will be successful is because of this open building, co-building, you know, building on top of Lego bricks, composability that exists within Web3 is undefeatable. No one can beat that. You know, Meta, good luck, you know, because, you know, one organization versus thousands of individual creative organizations helping each other, standing on each other's shoulders, deliberately or unintentionally, is going to move much faster than you ever could.
Awesome. And David, do you have anything to add to that as well? I mean, man, Aaron's just like blasting off.
Once you get him going. Yeah. Well, what I can say is, you know, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of these ventures on the journey. And when you step back and you take a look at the whole picture and the landscape, it is kind of breathtaking. Like, oh shit, that's how that fits in there. This is what that's going to be enable at the end of it. These three companies coming together and doing that. And it's honestly really breathtaking when you when you get the opportunity to look at the whole landscape and think what the possibilities are in the future.
Yes, I mean, totally. And speaking of like possibilities, the future, people doing really awesome and amazing things, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the like maybe like lesser known pieces of the project, but you know, obviously you guys have been supporting like other projects, particularly around like community and culture. I know you guys were like supporting there was a Tiki project like recently, like centered around like New Zealand culture and heritage, which I thought was really, really amazing and beautiful. And as well as the Fluff World project actually also supported some social causes as well. So I would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I like it's again, it's been one of those things that I think we've all got into this space because we wanted to make a difference, and whether that's by giving people more economic freedom or access than they would have, whether it's enabling communities to come together and to you know, be creative and create new platforms for them to kind of monetize creativity, whether it's you know, allowing you know, the metaverse itself kind of providing this platform for breaking down barriers between cultures and peoples. Like, I think all of these things are really cool things that emerge out of Web3, and it's the reason I got into the space in the first place, because you can do some good. And so doing good is like a big part of why I'm in the space personally. And with Fluff World, we were like, you know, how can we kind of give back and respect the fact that while the metaverse is this cool and awesome place, we live in a physical world. You know, we're impacted by things that our society is impacted by things that we can help change. And so when we set up the Fluff World collection, we said that we were going to put 10% of everything that we make into sustainability initiatives, and that's, you know, across the board, from climate change through to economic sustainability to Indigenous inclusion, like all the things that come together to make our planet a more viable place to exist on. And so we've already started to kind of release some of that funding now. And the first thing we announced recently was the $100,000 to Sustainable Coastlines, who do a great job of cleaning up, you know, the beaches and waterways and helping us, you know, plant, you know, regenerative spaces that we can kind of get clean water and clean environments for us to exist in the real world. And this kind of circle of giving back's like built into pretty much every collection that we do. We're always looking for ways to give back to the community. And Tiki's was like an interesting thing as well, because you know, that's another Kiwi organization. Both Dave and I are Māori ourselves, so we're Indigenous New Zealanders, and so it's our own heritage. And when they approached me with the idea, I was like, this is just such a great embodiment of what the metaverse is about, is kind of bringing creativity and culture together into a space that can take something which many people would never engage with in their lives and spread it all around the world. You know, they have now people from dozens of countries who probably never would have touched Māori culture before that are experiencing what it means to be, you know, an Indigenous New Zealander through the medium of this NFT. And so it's a great connecting device for people from different cultures around the world to come into a space. And the great thing about like being you know, a fluff as well, like or whatever, choose your avatar, is that no one gives a fuck where you're from or where you went to school or how, you know, what ethnicity you are or which gender you choose or any of those things. You know, you're part of that community and that identity, and it breaks down so many barriers. It's such a cool facet of how this metaverse is building out. And I'm so like passionate about making sure that the metaverse that emerges is this kind of collectively built thing, because otherwise we'll end up with this homogenous suckerverse, which is trying to cater to the most bland outcome that is, safe to put on TV before 6:30 p.m. And that's not really reflective of the world and its diversity. And so really leaning into making sure that everything we do is done in a way that means that communities are part of it, they own it, they get to perpetuate, the richness of culture that we see and vibrancy we see in the real world into this new space.
Beautiful.
Build the world you want to live in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got a unique opportunity with the metaverse to genuinely do that. And maybe we'll end up with a scenario of life imitating art at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Altered State Machine itself is a really important project in this vein, because if you look at, if we kind of be a little bit more philosophical, artificial intelligence is going to have an increasingly large impact on our lives. It already impacts us in ways that people don't actually realize or understand, in general. You look at things like Facebook, for example, it's a mind control device. That's what it is. And you might think that that's, alarmist and scary, but think about it. What is its job? Its job is to sell advertising. Well, how does it be effective at selling advertising? Well, it tells its customers, brands, that it can help them change your mind, because that's what advertising is. So we've created the world's, first at-scale global mind control machine. And in the background of that are all of these AIs that are taking our data and using our data and then feeding it back to us to make us do things. And sometimes those things are innocuous, like, buy the next device that comes out. And sometimes they're shitty, like vote for a crappy person as a president. And so if we keep going down this path where big companies are in control of this technology, and this technology is being used to impact the way we make decisions in the real world, that's actually the Black Mirror episode version of the way that history plays out. And now with something like the ASM protocol, we have the opportunity to democratize the tools for creating and owning intelligence and putting that intelligence to work in tasks. So we can still have the same outcomes. We could still have the good parts of a preference API that helps us find and discover products and services and humans. But I can now own that, and it can be mine as an individual, and I can control who interacts with it and what data it learns and all of those other kinds of things. And so we can create this fork in the road now where, the bad path of where centralization of artificial intelligence and the driving force of data behind that artificial intelligence could lead us down a nasty path that's irreversible. Because once you get far enough down the mind control path, you're not even aware that you're making bad decisions for yourself. If that impacts policy and legislation and all those kinds of things, you might just go along with it because you've been trained to think that way. So now we have the opportunity to take the other fork and get more control. So all these kinds of things are doing good in their own way, whether it's providing more access to people through DeFi and an unbiased finance arrangement, or whether it's opening up intelligence for the masses, or it's giving back deliberately through monetary contributions to things that matter for our planet. All of this metaverse space should be about creating this, better world for us to exist in the digital spaces and in the physical spaces.
I totally agree. David, do you have anything else to add to that, or?
One of the cool things that I can see coming out of Altered State Machine is representation. So, I mean, it's commonly known that AIs are trained by nerdy white dudes in basements, and the impacts of those decisions impact everyone towards their unintentional bias. And democratizing AI gives us this great opportunity to be more inclusive and representative of who the world is out there.
I think we definitely align on that 100%. And I guess like one of the things I'd love to know is maybe like through those sort of ethos, like obviously NFTs are expensive. Fluffs are also expensive comparatively to other people around the world. In the future, how do you guys envision creating systems and tools and resources that are not only accessible to people who are affluent or like super active in the space, but also people who might not have that much money to spend on it? Is that something that plugs in, or is there something you have in mind?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think people have to realize that where we're headed with the space is layers of content, and those layers being accessible to different people. It's not rational or reasonable that everyone who engages with the metaverse is going to have to pay $20,000 to get a ticket to the table. And so where you'll see content evolving is, and where we're kind of focused on, is you'll have kind of a layer of premium content, which is kind of the center of a universe, and then increasing layers that build out around that become more and more accessible. You know, where successful metaverse organizations are headed are not releasing 10K collections at $100,000 a pop. It's getting 10 million users spending $50 a pop. You know, that's where content's going to go to over time, and so you have these kind of layers of content value, just like we see and replicate in the real world. You can buy a Ferrari, or you can buy a Lambo, or you can buy a Toyota. You know, like these spectrums of assets exist, and that will play out in the metaverse space. And we are building that into our kind of framework for Fluff World, and we've been very deliberate in Altered State Machine about the downstream mechanics that make it accessible. We want everyone in the world to have an ASM brain. And so that's one part, being really kind of deliberate about how you're setting up your ecosystem of content so that you can bring more people in over time, without, while creating more value for those who got in early and started to kind of be part of that journey with you and help create it. I think the other interesting thing, particularly as play to earn emerges as a mechanism for providing the opportunity for people who are in emerging markets to enter the space and to make a living out of working in the space. The Altered State Machine does something quite unique there, I think. If you look at play to earn economic loops now, you have two classes of individuals, and they're almost trapped in those classes. You've got asset owners, and then you've got the workers, the serf class, who are paid to farm these assets. And while that's good in a sense, because that's employment, right, and people can put food on the table, what it does is entrenches this kind of class division in the metaverse, which is kind of scary, I think. And as the workers get more involved and better at playing the game, all they're doing is creating more wealth for the asset owners, and the chance for that worker to become an asset owner, that gap keeps growing and growing. And so the difference that you can apply with the Altered State Machine is that all of these current economic loops rely on determinism, which is, if you roll the right asset, you're lucky enough, then it will be a good asset in the universe and it'll be worth more money. And the Altered State Machine, because intelligence is evolving organically and even in an evolutionary way, new players who get in at the bottom layer have as equal a chance as anyone as their player becoming an intelligent superstar. And so this kind of idea that everyone has the equal chance, and the only determinant between those two things is the effort you put into training it and the luck you get along the way. And so we can really change the dynamic for play to earn using Altered State Machine as a bedrock for giving everyone a fair chance, whether you're, you know, starting out with the $50 purchase or you're a whale that can afford the very expensive superstar. You've got an equal chance of being successful when you throw that intelligence into a new task, which I think is a really exciting thing.
Beautiful. David?
I think things like asset value should be closely tied to the effort and risk that you put in. So we in Altered State Machine, we like to reward our early adopters who have supported us, put in the time and effort into building out what we're doing, and but also making it accessible to everybody else as we go through this journey to come in at a point of engagement that makes sense for them and that they want to do. And having those two things coupled as your level of engagement and risk that you're taking is closely tied to the assets that you're holding.
Amazing. Well, guys, do you have any last things that you'd like to share with our audience? Obviously, we have amazing creators, collectors, social causes, and people affiliated in our NFT ecosystem. Our team is like huge supporters of your projects. Is there anything else you'd like to share, or like any cool social impact initiatives you're going to be working on in the coming months, weeks, days?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, if people have ideas about things that we could collaborate on to help make a difference, then hit us up, you know, whether that's ideas for us to kind of invest in from our fund, you know, fund we're building out of this content, the revenues from this content, or whether that's ways we can collaborate on content within the ecosystem to help introduce, you know, ways to do better as a society, or just cool art that you want to work on with us. You know, we've got these very cool, dynamic NFTs that we can collaborate with different artists to keep the content fresh and alive and vibrant. So like shout out to us if you've got ideas. I think you know, the other thing would be I think we need to, and we've had this conversation on another podcast recently, form some kind of manifesto or collective around like what we want the metaverse to be. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to do that, whether there's some kind of DAO or something that comes together to try and say, hey, look, these are the principles of the metaverse, and this is a manifesto for how we want this thing to build out, and maybe even go a step further into kind of standards evolution, because we've got all this kind of cool, awesome content that's coming out, and we want it to be interoperable. And so I think that, you know, that's maybe something to throw out there. And then lastly, we feel very strongly about wanting to encourage Indigenous people to get into this space and be creative. And there's historically been kind of a barrier between creative people and technology people, and Indigenous people have been usually quite creative but not very well rewarded for it, and technology people have usually been not Indigenous people and been very handsomely rewarded for it. And now we have the opportunity to close that gap. And so we're kind of be starting some initiatives to help encourage and educate more people to take that creative capability and bring it into the technology space and upskill them into that space. So that's another cool thing that we'll be launching soon.
Yeah, and on the sustainability side, we've made a recent announcement about partnering with Carbon Click, another awesome New Zealand company, to double offset the carbon emissions from the minting. I just want to say that I think this should be the standard in this space, the NFT space and metaverse space. We have an opportunity to, as we were saying earlier, create the world that we want to live in. And let's let some of that metaverse ethos bleed back into the real world for a better space.
Beautiful, guys. Well, it's really been a pleasure to talk to you guys. I know you probably have tons of alpha you're going to share in the coming weeks. I won't let anyone spoil it on this podcast, but it's been a real pleasure to talk to both of you. Obviously, you're both so passionate about the things you're working on, all things AI, NFTs, Web3, and empowering other communities and individuals. So thank you again for joining us today. Everyone, please make sure to check out Altered State Machine, Centrality, EnterDAO, all these projects, including Fluff World as well. Multiple ways to plug in, multiple ways to connect with these amazing audiences and communities. We're doing good, and we are very excited to be launching our platform this week. If you want to connect with us, please make sure to check out our Discord and Telegram channels, and we're all over social media as well at DoinGud HQ. So thank you so much, and we look forward to having you join us again next week. Talk to you guys later.
Yeah, cheers, man. Thank you.